Hey guys, Montel here, and welcome to this edition of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. My guest today is a lifelong cannabis enthusiast, an advocate, and a parent of one of the first medical card holders in the state of New York. Together with her husband and 2 kids, she moved from New York City to Holyoke, Massachusetts, leaving her Wall Street career behind to launch the Highend, a vertically integrated cannabis company centered around organic living, soil cultivation, solventless extraction, and hospitality and homegrown driven retail experience. Helen Gomez Andrews, thank you so much for being a guest today on Let's Be Blunt with Montel.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me. It's
of course,
such an honor.
My goodness, thank you. It's an honor to be able to talk to you. Look, let's talk a little bit about you before, what your background was before you got into cannabis, and then why you actually got into cannabis. Where are you originally from?
I'm originally from the Philippines. I moved to New York City in 2001 for university. Never left, I guess not until 2019 when I moved up here. Graduated from NYU, ended up working in finance for about 13 years. Got married, had kids in the city, and sort of towards the end of my career in finance was, feeling drawn to a more impactful existence, and also at the same time, grappling with my daughter's epilepsy, which she was diagnosed with at the age of 5. And watching the cannabis industry unfold, and also at the same time learning about cannabis as medicine in pediatrics, and just learning all about that all at once.
Well, very interesting. Was your daughter diagnosed with adolescent onset epilepsy or full-blown epilepsy?
So it's pretty tricky.
I should tell you the reason why I asked that question is my daughter was diagnosed with adolescent onset epilepsy. We probably have shared a very similar journey in life. How old is your daughter now first?
She's 13.
13. My daughter first started experiencing what they called, mini malls around 8.5, though they were not even really diagnosed correctly until about 13. And
wow.
So I wonder your journey, because my daughter didn't have her first grand mal until she was around 13.5, and she actually had it while she was in a sleep diagnostic center where they were looking at her to see if she had epilepsy, and boom, she had a grand mal while she was there. And then from that point forth, I tell you, it's been a hell of a journey. My daughter's now 37, 38 years old, 39. That's the reason why I asked whether or not it was adolescent onset or full-blown epilepsy, because there's lots of different things that will happen along her journey of life.
Yeah, that's really incredible. I'm so glad to hear that, she's 37 and doing great. That's really inspiring for us, because there's so much that's still unknown about the brain. And my daughter's epilepsy is basically called idiopathic, which means they don't know what causes it. When she was 5, very similar to what you're describing, these mini malls, like barely even, like we didn't even, the way that she expressed what was happening to her was not at all what my husband and I knew to be seizures. She was down, hearing noises. Yeah.
Please go ahead. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I want you to go ahead and explain this, because I got a lot of viewers out there who are probably looking in right now, trying to figure out what to do in their own home. Like for us, we really, I tell you, they called her initial ones auras. I don't know if that was a term that you heard used. Okay, right. She had these auras, which was really weird. As a matter of fact, the first time I even noticed one was we were swimming. I had a big pool, and she was walking up out of the pool, and she stopped on a step, and she just stopped like a statue. She stood there for like count of 30, 40. And when she popped out and she started crying. And I was like, what's the matter? She goes, I don't know what's wrong. And she was only 8, so she didn't even understand how to describe what was going on. And we went through that for, I'm telling you, at least a year before I started to think, wait, there's something wrong here. This is not really normal adolescent behavior or child behavior. Because I mean, and literally she would, I don't want to use the term freeze, but it was almost as if she would, and you could talk to her and her eyes didn't move. She didn't move. Then all of a sudden she woke up like what? And I thought, oh, you're just playing a game. And then started to realize that this was a little bit more serious than we thought. And from like age 9 to 11, we kept taking her to doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor. And no one could really explain what was going on because again, none of those symptoms manifest while she was in a doctor's office. So therefore they couldn't figure
Right.
it out. And then, unbeknownst to us, and what we're starting to realize now is that at that time, let's see, when was this? This was probably 2000. No, this was in the early 90s. So about 94, 95, motion pictures had just started doing a lot of that unbelievable, really strange lighting effects in the background. And I would notice that sometimes when she would be watching a movie, she would like freeze. And I thought, was the movie scaring her? But what we weren't understanding was that there were triggers from media that were really even causing some of these auras. So they're not causing the auras, but at least making
Yeah.
them come out. And so it wasn't until about 13 that we then, after the first grand mal, that we realized, wait a minute, this child's got some issues. And they realized that it was adolescent onset epilepsy, which I will, you and I can, at some point in time, we'll sit down and have a comparative conversation. But the nightmares did pursue. I mean, I'm telling you, this was
Yeah.
her age 13 through literally almost 22. Um, I wish I had had a family that I could have talked to look and see some of the things that were coming down the pike, because what you don't even recognize is that some of the medications that they put children on are medications that children
Hmm.
should not be on that cause
Yes.
additional issues and problems. So,
Yes.
I'm pray for you and your family because I don't want you to go through what we had to go through. My daughter literally, became addicted to prescription medications, and we didn't even know that. And then, of course, as we tried to
Yeah.
wean her off the prescription medications, and she became addicted to, you know, other substances that she could find to see if she could alleviate what was going on inside of her. So it was tough. It was a tough period of time. She is, and I said 37, she's 38 years old, gave us our first grandchild, and she's doing well, though she still has remnants. She still knows that it's back there. I mean, she hasn't had any grandma, or she hasn't had any other seizures, but I can tell you there's certain things, again, offline, we can chat about them if you like, but there's certain things that she really has to be very, very careful about, and you guys have to be careful about it. You think, and I'm sorry, I'm not rambling, but little things like riding roller coasters, little things like
Right.
riding rides that wouldn't affect you and I. I'll never forget in her mid 20s, after we had gone through, what I'd like to think is kind of like almost hell and back, and she was on the other side and starting to recover and feeling better about herself. We got excited, and I used to be a big roller coaster enthusiast, and so was she. And I didn't even realize that I was helping to trigger some of her auras and some of her seizures by taking her on roller coasters. And then we went to Las Vegas. She's 27 years old, and she just wanted to jump off that needle thing. She wanted to do that bungee thing off the needle. And I was like, okay, let's go do it. And we did it once. Perfect. She goes, I want to do it again. I was like, no, I don't think we should.
Oh
I
boy.
want to do it again. And of course, we do it again. Came down. She had not had a grand mal for like 6 years. Boom, right there in the middle of the hotel. She fell down and had a grand mal because it just overwhelmed everything about her. So, there's little things that you can, especially movies, fast moving things, abrupt movements of her head and her equilibrium can trigger some of the auras and responses. And they don't even know sometimes that they're having one. So anyway, if you ever want to chat offline, we can do that. But
Absolutely.
yeah, sure. But go ahead. And you were explaining that, the process of what started happening with your daughter.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say you said she gave you your first grandkid, and
Mm.
that is, I mean, that's the dream for us. I know, these are things that you just don't know at this age, like what they're going to be able to do, drive, go away, spend, do a year abroad while you're at college. These are things that we don't want to think about, but are very real questions for parents of kids with epilepsy. And it's really encouraging to hear that these things, these things can happen. Very similar to what you described. She was having moments of we didn't know what was going on. She was 5. She was so little. She would just pause and, like you said, break down and cry because she didn't know what happened, what just happened. And we thought, oh boy, is this anxiety? Are we so stressed out that, we're transferring stress to our child? Um, and then, a few months after it was in the summer when it first happened. I think it was in June or July. We were out of the country, visiting my husband's family in Ireland, and it happened again. And we were at a carnival where they had one of those like spinny spiral things, and you look at it and um, you know, to a normal person, you might feel a little bit dizzy, but sort of it happened again, and we're like, oh gosh, this is unusual. But by the end of our trip, the last day of our trip, she was having one of these episodes every hour or so, every hour and a half, every 2 hours. And we got on the flight home. Um, she was having them every hour. We landed in New York City. We called her pediatrician. We brought her in the very next day, and she presented this in front of him. And he had no idea what was happening. He was like, she seems fine. It was crushing, soul crushing. Here we are. We don't know what's going on, and the pediatrician says she's fine. But if you need to see a neurologist, here's a few. And you know what it's like in New York. You call a neurologist. It's like, no, November or January, perhaps we can see you. I had to go back to work. My husband's with her. I'm at work, like Googling pediatric neurologists, like who can we see, calling every single office that I can call. And finally, that afternoon, I don't know how we managed, but we got into somebody's office. We had to go through the emergency room, and she sat in front of the doctor and had one of these, she just closes her eyes, and no one else has no idea what's going on, but she closes her eyes. She comes out of it. She says she's hearing noises, and she cries a little bit. And the doctor says, that's a seizure. And then she gets admitted, and, the overnight, the EEG, all of that. And then, you know, overnight, the doctor comes to me with a big thick book, like a menu, like he's a sommelier at a restaurant. He says, these are the meds that we give kids with epilepsy.
And
These are the
anyway,
ones that I would recommend.
and I got to jump in on that because I mean, for any
Yeah,
parent, you think that you're listening to a person who's an expert, but they're not. And what's so
they're not,
crazy about these things is the
nobody
fact that
knows.
they don't know. And the drugs that they put down in front of you are drugs that were designated for people 18 years and older. They were not designated for children. And even though they've gotten away with using them for children, I think the PDR even suggests that you don't put children on those kinds of medications for long periods of time. So I went through that same thing, listening and thinking that the doctor knew what he was talking about and not realizing that they were doing nothing but drugging my child. But go ahead. I'm so sorry.
No, this is that. It's exactly that. I mean, she went through, like, she's on her like fifth or sixth medication now, but there was a time when, you know, when you're transitioning to one med to another med, they want it to be a smooth transition. So they give your kids Xanax or Clonopin to ease. And you're like, hang on a second. My 40-year-old friend takes that because she has severe, fear of flying. Like, well, it's, they don't know. Of
Right.
course they're well intentioned, but they really don't know. And when you talk about triggers, like there are things that we've found to be triggers. Like we'll reward our kids with junk food occasionally. Like if we're driving home somewhere and they've been great, they love Chick-fil-A, we'll go to Chick-fil-A, and the next day, I don't know, it's been a while, but she'll have a seizure. And we've been very fortunate, I'd say, if that's the right word to use, is that 99% of her seizures happen in her sleep. So she wakes up. I don't know if that's your experience too, but she wakes up and comes into my room, takes a deep breath, gets on my lap, and then has the seizure. Which, she's getting so much bigger now. We've been very lucky that it hasn't really interrupted her school life. But last weekend she was at a soccer game and she started to have auras on the field. And she's telling her coach she doesn't feel well. The coach doesn't know what that means. He's a coach to a bunch of teenage girls. I don't feel well could mean a million things. And she's able to slow it down. Like she hasn't had a grand mal during the day, but she has pretty intense auras and they escalate. And then, I don't generally, she has a cannabis oil regimen, morning CBD oil, evenings THC oil and CBD oil. But when she has daytime auras, escalation of them, I give her 1 milliliter, a dropper of THC oil, and within half an hour, 45 minutes, it's just completely washed away. She feels great. She doesn't, she's not high or cloudy. You can tell just by looking at her that this, like, the cloud of the auras has just lifted from her. But cannabis has been really, really great, really helpful, has solved a lot of things, but it hasn't cured her. She still has seizures every few weeks.
Well, let's back up for a second because that must have been a tough decision. When did you make the decision? Well, first off, she's the first card carrying cannabis consumer, one of the first cannabis card carrying consumers in the state of New York. When did you make the decision to even try cannabis? What, I mean, you're not a Wall Street, you're a Wall Streeter, and a person who I'm not going to call conservative, but a person who literally I wouldn't think would have looked at this as one of your first lines of defense. What triggered you and what made you think about cannabis? Was it the Sanjay Gupta special?
Yeah, actually it was. I mean, I don't, I've sort of been a cannabis enthusiast more years in my life than I haven't. Definitely in college, sampled a little bit in high school. I was no stranger to cannabis. It just never would have crossed my mind to give it to a child. But a year before, maybe even 2 years before any of this happened, I did watch the Sanjay Gupta documentary. And I learned a lot. And it was back when you still had to like DVR stuff. I guess you still do that now, but it was different. Like you had only X capacity, and I had recorded it. And I just remember 2 years later, like telling my husband, "You have to watch it. It's got to still be there. You have to." And thinking after I had looked at that menu of drugs that was being recommended. And it was so weird. It was like, these are the ones that I like. These are the ones that my partner likes. But, have a gander and see if any speak to you. I'm like, are you joking? I have no idea what's happening. It was hard. It was terrifying. But then I remembered, what I had learned watching that documentary and learning about Charlotte Figge, and, may God bless her precious soul up in heaven right now. I learned a lot about that, and I asked the questions, and the doctors didn't really know. I mean, this was 2016. No, 2015. 2015, they hadn't, I think they had just legalized medical, but they hadn't permitted it yet. It was still sort of, so I had asked about it, and they didn't really know much about it. I had also heard that NYU was doing some research, and ultimately I reached out to the pediatric neurology at NYU and transferred over there. But even at that point, it was not only was there not enough information, I don't think there was or education. I don't think there was much of a desire by the neurologists to really dig into it and learn about it at the time. I'm sure it has changed, but
Yeah, there wasn't much of an
um,
understanding back then of the endocannabinoid system. There wasn't much of an understanding back then of all the research that had been done all over the world, answering some of the questions that a lot of doctors have in the United States, but they didn't bother trying to figure it out for themselves. I mean, there's a lot of research that's been out there that discusses seizures and seizure maladies and cannabis. Though we do know, and you nailed it when you said it correctly, it's not the cure. It's not what's going to end all seizures, but it's something that is a tool that, like any other weapon in a quiver, it can be used sparingly, but when used the right way with children, there have been results. Now, I also understand from my own research is that, and the research I've done for myself, because I've utilized cannabis for my diagnosis of MS for my entire journey with MS. And there are times throughout that journey where my consumption of cannabis and the type of cannabis that I use has changed. And that will probably be
of
something that
course.
you'll notice with your daughter. Like right now, you were saying that, I mean, you started off with probably trying to use mostly only CBD, but realized that wasn't a big enough gun. So then you add a little THC, and oh, that was great. But then when you added too much THC, oh my goodness, it doesn't work. Well, let's back off a little bit and add a little bit more CBD. So it is going to be kind of that I don't know what you want to call it. You gotta just keep trying and keep trying, keep trying until you hit that sweet spot. And that sweet spot may work for 3 or 4 months. Then you may have to find a new sweet spot.
Right. And, growth spurts,
Correct.
hormones, all of
Correct.
these things. And, also my daughter's not a guinea pig,
Right.
but at the same time, we just don't know enough about epilepsy and what cures epilepsy, what suppresses, and now there's a tremendous amount of research about the gut brain connection and diet and epilepsy, and you know there's still a lot to learn, and I'm hopeful though that doctors are more and more open to exploring other avenues, rather than just, surgery, which is also pretty terrifying.
Sure, pretty terrifying. Now, so you first initially tried to enter the medical cannabis market in New York, got your daughter a card, was able to give it to her, but then you decided to leave New York and move to Mass. And I know I'm probably jumping way far further because there was a lot of things that happened in between. Why don't you take us on that journey and tell us how you decided to, if I can't find what I want myself, I'll grow it myself and I'll find a place I can grow it in, right?
Right. I mean, well, you know that at the time, not only did the medical program prohibit home grow, but you had all of these multi-state operators basically lobbying the governor to continue prohibiting home grow. So, and that's really important for us as advocates, as we consider the business side of cannabis, is to continue supporting home grow and access to medicine. But right around the same time that I'm feeling quite uninspired in my work life, um, managing our daughter's health. States are legalizing left and right. We were considering moving out west, and having a go at the industry in that way. And um, sometime around, I think it was late 2017, after we had started attending, grassroots industry networking events in the city, Massachusetts legalized. and they were very welcoming. Unlike Colorado at the time, which you had to be a resident to participate in the industry, Massachusetts was open to non-residents. And we began exploring that opportunity. And initially, with my husband's background, who's my business partner now as well, his background in hospitality, the genesis of our business was originally a culinary one. Exploring cannabis chocolates is really where it started, and then learning about, what's the main ingredient? How do you get the main ingredient? What's the cleanest way? What's the most sustainable way? What is whole plant medicine? And of course, being all of being infused by our perspective on medical cannabis, led us down the path of living soil cultivation, and that's really where we've built our foundation for our business. Um, Still, pre-operational, but working on it. We traded in our um, amazing little Brooklyn home for a 60,000 square foot mill building in Holyoke, and have been working towards building our business here since 2019. Had a ton of momentum going into COVID, and we're stalled quite a bit, but have picked up the pieces and are little by little, you know, building and getting in there.
Not only did COVID throw a monkey wrench into the industry, in some ways it helped the industry, but in other ways it hurt the industry because, again, it became an essential service in lots of the states that have cannabis programs. But then again, it also changed how you could actually deliver and distribute the product.
Yeah.
And then, now that we've come out of it, I think people are still, I mean, I see a pre-COVID cannabis world and a post-COVID cannabis world. I mean, the pre-cannabis world, the pre-COVID cannabis world was one where cannabis was more of a shared experience. And then post-COVID, it's become more of an individualized experience where people, you don't see a lot of people sharing as much, standing around smoking a joint together anymore. That's kind of stopped. But then again, it hasn't stopped in some circles. But it definitely threw a monkey wrench into the industry, slowed down progress. The state of Massachusetts took off, though. You have lots of competition in Massachusetts.
Yes, there is lots of competition in Massachusetts, but competition is good. And I think that the intent behind the regulatory framework here was really one that was supportive of small independent business. And you've seen just in the past year that some of these massive behemoth corporations that think that they can come into Massachusetts and churn out a product and undercut the price of everybody else on wholesale, think that they're just going to dominate, and they haven't been able to. We've seen some of those big businesses exit because no matter how much weed they can supply at the cheapest prices, Massachusetts residents just don't want it. I think there's a really great culture here that supports small independent business. I think consumers really are more aware of the difference between a true craft cultivator, and a tier 10 indoor grow that has a craft line. And I think that in Massachusetts, people really go out of their way to learn the story of businesses, to support small business. And I think in the past year, we've seen that a lot of these small businesses now are starting to really thrive. So it's encouraging, and competition is good.
Yeah, I think competition is good. Also, I really do. You kind of consider yourself a cannabis family refugee, right? A medical cannabis refugee.
Yeah, our lawyer jokes that we're cannabis refugees, but the truth is, we kind of are. I hate to say it, the compassionate care program in New York was insulting for patients. It was atrocious. You had very little choice of product. You couldn't grow your own, and the product that was available to you at medical dispensaries was so expensive. And there just wasn't enough education either. And coming up to Massachusetts and becoming medical card holders here, which had its own challenges. Like they make it incredibly hard for pediatrics to get a medical card under the guise of safety, but actually it really doesn't work out in the way they intend. But there's a tremendous amount of choice. There's a tremendous amount of information. I know that it's been several years and things have evolved, but being able to choose not only who makes my tincture, who I'm buying it from, how they extract it. Is it ethanol, CO2, butane, avocado oil? Like there's so many, you get to choose. You get to choose how the cannabis is grown that is then extracted into your tincture. So if you're a parent or a caregiver like me that really cares about how the plant is grown, how it's extracted, whole plant, soil, all of that, and the belief that um, that certain cultivation methods result in better medicine, Massachusetts had those options for us.
That's great. Well, tell me a little bit about your company, the Highend. Talk about it for a minute.
So, yeah, we're actually the first company, cannabis company in Massachusetts to be certified as both women and minority owned. That's something we're very proud of. We are, as I said, pre-operational and sort of inching our way forward, but are very excited to hopefully soon build out a small garden with indoor living soil, with an indoor living soil cultivation program, and our processing facility where we will start our processing, our manufacturing with solventless extraction methods, clean ice water, and just very clean, very simple, very straightforward, and very transparent. We want to be incredibly transparent about how we do everything from start to finish.
And are you focusing more on tinctures, or are you focusing on smokables, or are you focusing on vapes? What are you focusing on?
Well, we want to introduce a product to the market that has sort of a broad audience initially. We would love to do tinctures ultimately. Absolutely. That's very important to us. But our first SKUs into the market will be live rosin cartridges, and they call them dabs. I like to call them dips, but little concentrate jars.
Mm-hmm. So you want to start with that first, and are you going to be a grower, manufacturer, processor, and then distribute through other dispensaries, or will you open up your own?
A bit of both, hopefully. We do have a retail license, but amazingly signed our lease on our retail space 2 weeks before lockdown in 2020. And so that has been incredibly challenging. And of course, there's a lot of retail, a lot of competition, but we still believe in our vision for retail. So that would be phase 2, but absolutely hope to be on shelves of the many great independent retailers in Massachusetts, and eventually open up our retail and coffee shop, sort of had the hospitality component into it, and really focus on small brands, sun-grown flower, living soil flower, and also find ways that we can support home growers through what we sell in the shop as well.
And you will. Did I hear you say? Are you looking for a consumption? Do you have a consumption license also?
So our coffee shop concept isn't necessarily intended to be social consumption. It's just our vision has always been to, to sort of expand the experience, the retail experience, and offer something other than just like popping into the shop to get your cannabis. You can go next door, maybe grab a cup of coffee, buy some accessories, some literature, have a sit down. To the extent that that can evolve into social consumption is something that we have in the back of our minds. Absolutely.
Well, I think that probably goes hand in hand with making sure that the consumer not only buys a product, but also gets a little education about the product also. Because I think, that's one of the things that I've been highlighting for the last 10 years. I think this industry has done a service to itself by sharing B2B information, but we've done a disservice to ourselves is by sharing B2C information. We do not
Yeah.
educate the consumer as much as we should be. And that's what we should be doing
Yeah.
a lot more of. What do you think about that?
I couldn't agree more. I think, when we think about the sort of programming that we would have in the coffee shop, thinking also about building a cannabis friendly co-working space, having programming like, having our head grower come and do an info session on what are companion plants and why is it so important to have companion plants in your grow, or have a nutritionist come and explain how you can integrate minor cannabinoids into your diet, or things like that. Education I think it's improved, but I think that consumers really like engage. I've seen in many instances where that kind of programming really draws consumers in, and customers, they like it, they appreciate it, they want to be more engaged in that, and that's our hope, is that we
Yeah,
can
I
do that
think
sort of thing.
that's on us as an industry. It's our responsibility to make sure that we provide those services to the consumer, because I think, as you've said, I mean, I happen to be on shelves in multiple dispensaries in Massachusetts. As a matter of fact, I just signed a deal in Georgia where I'm involved with one of the major licensees
Awesome.
in Georgia, the only one that right now has contracts in independent pharmacies. So not only in Georgia can we sell the product in dispensaries, but we've got over 120 independent pharmacies all over the state that will be able to carry the products here within the next 2 months. I think we should be on shelves by January, hopefully. Looking forward to
That's
that.
amazing. I just read about Georgia and the pharmacies. That's huge.
It's
That's
good to do.
a whole new market.
Whole new market, and it's
Very
whole new,
exciting.
rather than having to fight the battle of where you put a dispensary and whether or not it gets approved, the pharmacist has, especially the independent pharmacists, has been here. They've been here for the last, 60, 70 years. And a lot of those stores have been servicing the same demographic for the last 60 or 70 years. Well, why not allow their customers to have access to a viable product? These are people who already know how to administer controlled substances. So this is just another controlled substance that they have to administer.
I love that. And I love that it's, independent, often generational family run businesses. Um, it's so important. I really believe, if executed properly, the cannabis industry can change the way that we look at all types of business, and how we can change other industries, and really support small independent business. And I think we're seeing a little bit of it, 2 steps forward, maybe 3 steps back
Yeah.
occasionally, but
Yeah.
I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane that we didn't even pass the Safe Banking Act here this last go round, which was really ignorant on the part of our congressman. And now ain't nothing going to happen there until these fools figure out how to settle their individual disputes within their own parties. But I think that's another
It's
thing
insane.
that the industry has really been a little bit behind in doing. We've literally jumped out there trying our best to sell our products for the highest market cap that we could sell them for our businesses, without thinking about the long term. We've been thinking about the short term, and the long term is something that has gotten away from this industry. The amount of lobbying that used to take place is not going on anymore. And unfortunately, as long as we have this breed of diehard buttheads in our Congress and Senate, we're going to be faced with this uphill battle for the next 10 to 15 years. There was a while back in, let's say, 2017, 18, I thought, oh, well, national change or change at the national level would take place in the next 3 to 4 years. I'm not even betting on that for the next 10 years because we're not doing enough as an industry to educate those people in office to make sure they understand. Take a look at this. You opened the dam and nobody got flooded as much as they thought. You legalize cannabis and no, the sky is going to fall. Didn't fall.
No. In fact, you're seeing less drunk driving incidents and all sorts of other things. But what you said about safe banking, I mean, it's the general public doesn't understand that the implications of safe banking or sort of iterations of safe banking, but an MSO can get a traditional bank line of credit at 6%, but a small independent business cannot get an SBA loan. And I think, having SBA, having community foundations and CDFIs and sort of giving them the green light to support small business changes a lot. And you're right, lobbying is so important.
Well, I think we're going to see, as this diehard breed of generation, and it's almost kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, though I'm disgusted by the, blockade that's going on in our Congress and our Senate right now, by some of these diehard politicians who don't give a damn about anything except for their own little fiefdom.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy that that's there because finally the public is starting to see this. The public is finally starting to say, what do I pay these people to do? They can't do nothing. So eventually we will get rid of some of them. And as we get rid of that generation, we will bring in a generation who understands that there's nothing wrong with cannabis and there hasn't been anything wrong with cannabis. Let's move this thing forward. What have been some of the other really difficult obstacles that you've had to face in launching this business?
Access to capital has been the number one barrier for us. And I would consider ourselves, pretty fortunate with where we are positioned. We own real estate, we have licenses, we have sort of benefits to being sort of certified women and minority owned. But access to capital continues to be very challenging, even for folks with collateral. I don't know, my story about access to capital is dime a dozen here in Massachusetts and elsewhere in the country. I think there's so many other obstacles in the regulatory framework that small businesses also face. For example, if you're a delivery business, which in Massachusetts has been made exclusive for social equity business owners, which is a great thing for the next at least 2 years. Those businesses, unlike any other state in the country that has a delivery license, Massachusetts requires those operators to have 2 people in the car at all times. So not only do you have a business, not only do you have people who are trying to start businesses in an environment where access to capital is very challenging, they now have double payroll, double workers' comp, double insurance, and it just doesn't work. There's many things like that.
Yeah, none of which can be written off.
None of it can be written off. None of it can be written off. Exactly. You've got, folks, cultivators who are, in my opinion, doing things the right way. You've got a ton of like organic, regenerative outdoor farms. You've got a very small handful of indoor living soil cultivators who who employ sustainable farming practices, but when they go to test their product, in Massachusetts, they don't distinguish between beneficial microbes and harmful pathogens. So if you have a healthy microbe on your plant, you're going to automatically fail unless you remediate. So these are other challenges that small businesses face. They have to either buy a really expensive remediation machine, which is also not super desirable for the end consumer, or in some cases, if you're a medical patient that is immunocompromised, it's very important for them to know that their flower has been remediated. But there's a lot of common sense things, and there's a lot of things not common sense regulations that amplify the challenges, the costs for small business that we can do away with, and everyone would still be fine and safe.
So, well, now, if people wanted to get more information about what you're doing, where would they go?
We have a website. It's thehighendcannabis.com. It's sort of still coming soon, but we have a lot in the works presently. Very, very close to having shovels in the ground here in Holyoke to build out our processing facility, and hopefully a small garden along with that. Hoping to, by the end of the year, launch a Mainvest crowdfund. And feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love engaging with people about medical cannabis, about the business of cannabis, and anything in between.
Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
In the next 5 years, my daughter will be graduating from high school and going to college, and that'll be my focus. Hopefully by then, we have a robust and healthy garden blossoming here in Holyoke with a solid business, and perhaps 280E is gone by then. And because we're from New York, hopefully we have a little bit of business going on in New York too. We actually just opened and started our applications for cultivation and manufacturing in New York. So 5 years from now, hopefully have a successful up and running business, and can dedicate more time to my family and other things.
Super. Anything else you want to add?
No, I'm just, I'm really grateful and honored for the opportunity to speak with you. It's really remarkable how, people connect over things. Epilepsy is not incredibly rare, but it's still not super common. I don't really know any other parents that have experienced what we're going through, and just meeting you and understanding, learning about your journey, and hopefully connecting with some more parents, and just helping one another learn more and get educated, and find other solutions. It's super important, and I'm really grateful for that.
No, thank you so much. And look, one more time, throw out the stats so people know how to get hold of you.
Www. .thehighendcannabis.com. There's a little button in the top right corner where you can email me. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn.
So Helen Gomez Andrews, thank you so much for being a part of Let's Be Blunt with Montel today. I look forward to meeting you. I spent some time. Matter of fact, I'll be in Mass next week doing a couple of pop-ups. So,
yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully maybe we get to meet next week. If you got some time.
I hope so too. Yeah, that would be lovely.
Absolutely. Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, and make sure everybody out there, thank you all so much for being a part of Let's Be Blunt with Montel today. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments.